Americans. These are international elitists. They have no allegiance whatsoever to the United States, just like your Canadian legislatures have no allegiance to you. They have no allegiance to Canada. They're part of the international elite. But of course, they don't say this publicly, and the press hails them all as great patriots and dedicated people, selfless individuals. They love that word selfless. Imagine all your legislators are selfless. They never have a selfish bone in their body because they're working for you. They want to give you things. And of course, the only purpose they have is to rob you. Not only you, but all 6 billion people in the world, because it's a government of robbery. So you have what you call the new economy in the United States, and probably Canada too. And the new economy is simply people working and creating and producing in spite of everything the robbers can do to them. Everything that's accomplished in this country is accomplished in spite of the foundations, in spite of the bankers. People have to work harder to pay the interest, but they do that. They rise to the challenge. At some point, the people will have to make themselves recognized, and they're doing this through the internet. The big question mark is the internet, and that's why Washington has been making frantic efforts to control the internet.
While Eustace is still slandered with derogatory labels, a Marxist tactic that has been effective since the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, which I also covered in a prior video. Can anyone today deny that overt media censorship exists, regardless of what one's own political ideology is? While the Federal Reserve Act was allegedly passed in an effort to establish economic stability and prosperity in the US by introducing a central bank to oversee monetary policy, one needs only look back at the history of the last century, including both world wars, which were financed by debt, and the subsequent inflation and financial consolidation of power, to see that the economic stability and prosperity was not intended for the general population, but for a small, secretive elite that does not owe its loyalty to any one nation, race, or religion, but to a globalist political agenda opposed to our freedom and committed to our servitude. In actuality, American history is far different from the way it has been presented in modern schools or portrayed on the big screen. Hollywood has a tendency to finance and promote blockbuster movies about historic events, which oftentimes, if not always, camouflages key points with a love story or some other distraction. One example of this is the movie Titanic, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, who put in a great job as an actor, but the film did not do the historic event justice, as it concealed the fact that many influential opponents to the Federal Reserve central banking system lost their lives with the sinking of that ship. It was this notorious incident in 1912 which made the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 possible. One of the most influential and popular documents exposing the formation of the Federal Reserve is a book written in 1994 by G. Edward Griffith called The Creature from Jekyll Island, which recounts a secret meeting that took place in 1910 on Jekyll Island, a stretch of white sand beaches and beautiful landscape off the coast of Georgia. It was an exclusive gathering of American financiers, politicians, and banking elite who covertly plotted the draft legislation for the creation of the all-powerful central banking system that not only financed both world wars, but has become an accomplice in the support of totalitarian regimes throughout the world. An excerpt from the book claims that, quote, there are few historians who would challenge the fact that the funding of World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War was accomplished by the Mandrake mechanism through the Federal Reserve System. An overview of all wars since the establishment of the Bank of England in 1694 suggests that most of them would have been greatly reduced in severity, or perhaps not even fought at all, without fiat money. It is the ability of governments to acquire money without direct taxation that makes modern warfare possible, and a central bank has become the preferred method of accomplishing that. We theorize a strategy dubbed the Rothschild formula, in which the world's money cabal deliberately encourages war as a means of stimulating the profitable production of armaments and keeping nations perpetually in debt. This is not profit-seeking, it is genocide. It is not a trivial matter, therefore, to inquire into the possibility that our elected and non-elected leaders are, in fact, implementing the Rothschild formula today.
When I did my research on this topic, I came to the conclusion, which may startle you folks here, that the Federal Reserve System does not need to be audited. It needs to be abolished. First of all, Jekyll Island is a real island. It's off the coast of Georgia. And it was on that island back in 1910 that the Federal Reserve System was conceived at a highly secret meeting that took place there. Now, what I'd like to do is talk about this meeting and show you that, in fact, the Federal Reserve was created there, and that there was a lot of secrecy surrounding it. And then we'll be confronted with the question, why the secrecy? When things are done in secret, there are often things to hide. And we'll explore what it was that they wanted to hide. And when we finally understand what that was, we'll be face to face with one of the most important facts about the Federal Reserve System that is not generally known. In 1910, Jekyll Island was privately owned by a small group of millionaires. In those days, they were millionaires. In today's dollars, they would be billionaires from New York. This is where their families went to spend the winter months. It was a resort island, a resort club. It was called the Jekyll Island Club. And there was a very elaborate clubhouse there, which was the center of their social activities. It's still there, by the way, if anybody wants to visit it. The island has been purchased by the state of Georgia, and this clubhouse has been renovated. It's a beautiful thing. And around this clubhouse, they had cottages, which were built by many of the families that belonged to the club. Cottages are not exactly the word I would have chosen to describe these structures. I remember taking the tour through one of them, the guide said that there were 14 bathrooms in that cottage. So you have an idea of the kind of elegance that was there. In any event, the number of bathrooms has nothing to do with the story. I just get hung up on that because it's hard for me to imagine a cottage with that much running plumbing. But the important point was that this is where the Federal Reserve System was conceived, is in that clubhouse. So let's tell that story. It all began in November of 1910, when Senator Nelson Aldrich sent his private railroad car to the New Jersey Railroad Station, where there it was in readiness for the arrival of himself and 6 other men who were instructed to come under conditions of great secrecy. For example, they were told to come one at a time, not to be seen together, not to dine together on the night of their departure. If they had arrived at the same time, they were instructed to pretend as though they didn't even know each other. They were to avoid newspaper reporters, because these were well-known men, and had they been spotted by reporters, which often frequented the railroad station, especially had they been seen together, many questions would have been asked. One of the men carried a shotgun in a big black case, so that if he had been asked where he was going, he was prepared to say that he was going on a duck hunting trip. And the interesting thing about that little piece of the history is that this man, we find out later from his biographer, never fired a gun in his life. He even had to borrow that shotgun in order to participate in this reception. Even after they got on board the railroad car, this pattern continued. They were told to use first names only, not to use last names. Well, the train traveled for 2 nights and a day on a 1,000-mile journey to the south, and when they awoke on the second morning, the car was on the siding, the railroad siding at Brunswick, Georgia. And from there, they took the ferry boat across the inland strait to Jekyll Island and to the clubhouse. And for the next 9 days, these men sat around a table and hammered out all the important details of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. And incidentally, if you visit that clubhouse today, you can walk down to the end of the one corridor there, and on a door is a brass plaque. And it says, in this room, the Federal Reserve System was created. When they were done, they got back on board the train, back to New York, and just